Welcome to the Who's Left podcast, a show about Indiana politics, history, and culture from the unapologetic perspective of the Hoosier left. My name is Scott Aaron Rogers, and I'm recording from Bloomington. Today, we continue our series of interviews with interesting Hoosiers running for elected office in 2024. My guest for this episode is Veronica Pedrell, Democratic candidate for Senate District 24, which encompasses all of Putnam and much of Hendricks County. Pedrell was elected to the Greencastle City Council in 2019, making history as Indiana's first openly transgender elected official. In her council service, she championed increased investment in city infrastructure, supported pay raises for police, fire, and other municipal employees to promote morale and retention. She continues to spearhead ongoing efforts with the city's Human Relations Commission to bring together city-county law enforcement, first responders, and mental health specialists to strategize improvements for mental health crisis responses in Putnam County. She also serves on the board of several nonprofits, including Putnam County Recovery Coalition, Indiana Youth Group, QPA, the LGBTQ Alumni Association at Princeton, Main Street Greencastle, and the Fuller Center for Housing of Putnam County. An outspoken champion for marginalized and vulnerable young people, Pedrell's community advocacy has been featured in regional press and television media. She represented Indiana in the national media by opening the Pledge of Allegiance for the second evening of televised programming at the 2020 Democratic National Convention. Veronica is an alumna of the fourth class of Hoosier Women Forward and was even awarded the honor of Kentucky Colonel by former Bluegrass State Governor Matt Bevin. She is active with 100 Women Who Care of Putnam County and also plays jazz and blues piano with her church community and in Putnam County's music scene. Our conversation covers her background, education, pioneering work in electronic music, and her role as a teacher and professor. We'll pivot to her run for city council and advocacy work before getting into this senatorial campaign, her top issues, and priorities should she win in November. But first, I desperately need your help. I lost my son in January, and my entire perspective on life changed. I used to be content as a handyman contractor. I could put on my headphones and tune out. The money was okay, and the stress non-existent. But now that I know real grief, all of that seems meaningless, and I feel called to prevent other parents from knowing that same emptiness. So I've devoted myself to this Who's Left project. My work is dedicated to calling out Indiana lawmakers, their financial backers, and others in their network that actively work to make Hoosier lives worse, those whose policies endanger children through lax gun regulation, bullying of queer youth, and environmental degradation. I work to highlight these bad actors so we can replace them with more empathetic leadership, and also shine the spotlight on the Hoosier activists, organizations, and elected officials who are doing the hard work to build a more just, equitable, and compassionate Indiana for the next generation of Hoosiers. I can't do this without you. Perhaps my decision was rash or imprudent, but I feel my boy pushing me, telling me to keep going. But all the passion and conviction in the world doesn't keep the lights on and food on the table. I rely on your financial support from paid subscriptions over at scottaaronrogers.substack.com. For $5 a month or only $50 a year, you can help me push our state in a better direction and help my family in the process. But even if a paid subscription doesn't work for you at this time, you can still help. Subscribe at the free level over on Substack. Set your favorite podcast player to auto-download new episodes of the show. Rate and review the podcast on whatever platform you use. Follow us on social media at facebook.com/who's left. That's HOOS left. And I'm personally at ScottRog78. That's SCOTTROG78 on Instagram, Threads, and the platform everyone still calls Twitter. I'm also on Mastodon at ScottRog78 at Hoosier.social, and now we have video too. On both YouTube and TikTok, the handle is @Who'sLeft. But most importantly, pass on the word. Forward the newsletter to your entire email list. Don't just like, but share on social media. Yell from the top of the nearest hill. With your investment, a full-time Who's Left looks like new content every day. It looks like full coverage of the 2024 election cycle in Indiana and beyond. And it looks like zooming out to see how the malevolent forces at work in our state function nationally and even globally. Again, it might not be financially prudent, but I do not plan on paywalling any content because I believe in open access to information, and your support helps make that content freely available to all Hoosiers. But I'm running out of funds and need your investment in order to do this full time. To those who have already contributed, thank you. It means the world to me. And to everybody, thanks for listening. Here's my interview with Veronica Pedrell. Veronica Pedrell, thank you for joining the Who's Left podcast. Welcome.
It's such a pleasure to be with you, Scott. Thank you so much for inviting me.
So, you are running for state senate in District 24. That is correct, yeah?
District 24 is an interesting and diverse district. We encompass parts of Hendricks County as well as Putnam County. The maps have changed since the last election for this particular seat, so I'm kind of excited to see how things are going to turn out. I believe that it's fair to say that the maps have gotten to be at least somewhat more advantageous to a Democratic candidate, insofar as there's more concentration in some of the more densely populated areas of Hendricks County. So if one looks at the geographic map of Senate District 24, looking at the old map versus the new map, there's a good amount of rural Hendricks County that has been tossed over to other adjacent Senate districts. I'm not sure whether that had anything to do with Senator John Crane's decision to not run for re-election for that particular seat this year.
Yeah, I saw that.
But it is an open seat this year, and that's also part of my decision why I decided to step in for this particular seat. Given that we should not let anything ever go unchallenged when it's an open seat.
Absolutely, and that's one of the big things I've been trying to push at here is making sure no seat goes uncontested.
Wait.
And we've got a big problem with that in Indiana because the maps have been stacked against us so badly for the last dozen years.
Well, and indeed, both of the Republican candidates who are vying for that nomination happen to be folks who have never run and won in any election where they were going up against somebody of a different political party. Which speaks to the whole dilemma of sheriff's races in rural and even suburban Indiana, where the primary winds up turning into being the election for the seat.
Yeah, and one of the Republicans vying for this seat, there is a primary. That's Brett Clark. He is former sheriff of Putnam County or Hendricks County?
Hendricks County, two-term sheriff of Hendricks.
Okay, that's what I thought, yeah.
And so in fact, I'm the only candidate from Putnam County, which is the more rural of the two counties. And but if you look at the sort of geographic map of District 24, we've got 9 townships in the district from Putnam County, 6 townships from Hendricks. But I would venture to say, and this was just my spit and glue estimation of population looking at township rolls, but it seems that there about 3 of those 6 townships in Hendricks County have as much population as all the other parts of Senate District 24. So we certainly want to be focusing on those concentrated population areas in Avon and Brownsburg and in Danville even.
Yeah, certainly. Hendricks County has been growing rapidly the last several years, hasn't it?
It has, and that speaks to some of the challenges that some of those communities face. If speaking as somebody who served as a municipal elected official, my firsthand experience speaks to some of the challenges that our local municipalities, towns, and cities face with respect to the ways that we're able to finance infrastructure improvements and all the things that a city needs to do to serve its residents well, right? And for those communities where there is explosive growth, especially, I think, Avon comes to mind, of course. The way that state code is set up for TIF funding it takes away a fair amount of local control for the real flexibility that's needed for the creative financing that a place that's experiencing that explosive growth needs to be able to continue on its growth trajectory.
Yeah, and you know what? I want to come back around. We'll talk about this, and we'll talk about your time as an elected official. But let's just talk about you first. Let's introduce Veronica to our listeners.
So I'm a Hoosier by choice. I came to Indiana half my life ago in 1996. I was born and raised in the Chicago area. I actually attended the same high school that Hillary Clinton attended. So I come from the same state that gave us both Hillary Clinton and Ronald Reagan. But to that point, I'm the daughter of a junior high school math teacher and a city municipal water engineer. So I come from a family that really valued those public goods of clean water and quality education, and those are values that I carry with me to this day in everything that I do in service. But my background is my formal education. I attended the University of Illinois for my undergraduate degree. I had the luxury and privilege to study as a music major. I was a music composition major, and I still do compose music. I am also an active and gigging jazz musician on top of all the other things that I do. I'm a church musician as well. But as far as that path took me, I'm a child of the 60s and 70s. And so when I was in high school, it was the golden age of synthesizers when all of the prog rock bands and the jazz fusion folks were using synthesizers in ways that were new and super creative. And that was something that really, really inspired me in terms of my own work. So when I went off to college, I was keen on learning what could I do that I could make a career out of with respect to electronic and computer music. And as it turned out, I started taking computer science courses at the University of Illinois, learning how to code and write my own software that would write music, believe it or not, as well as code that would synthesize music, because back in those days we were using mainframe computers to generate music. And my research in computer-assisted composition landed me a full doctoral fellowship at Princeton University in the late 80s, which was an amazing experience, and I feel very privileged to have had that opportunity. it was transformative to my life in many ways. It was also where I began to discover myself. As I was in my early 20s, I was on the East Coast, halfway between Philadelphia and New York, and exploring those communities and also coming to terms with my own gender identity at the time. And that's where I first started stepping outside in my chosen target gender. So, as I speak as an out transgender woman who transitioned nearly 20 years ago and has been on HRT for the majority of my adult life, my pathway is I never thought I was an early bloomer, but apparently for folks of my generation, a lot of folks who were born around the time I have or that I was, we transitioned much later in life than some folks are able to now, because society has had some evolution and science has had some evolution, and we recognize that healthy pathways, the most healthy pathways for gender variant people often may involve transition, with the assistance of medical professionals. And that's also something that I'm passionate about, is making sure that those pathways are open for other people to take if that becomes necessary for them.
So, anyway, what I was saying, I want to come back to your trans advocacy when we talk about your issue platforms. But you are the first out trans elected official in the state of Indiana, correct?
That is correct. And unfortunately, I'm still the only out trans elected official in the state of Indiana. I am making it my life's work to make sure that I'm not the last. So for sure, I am supporting others who are working to represent. And there are actually 3 of us that I'm aware of, at least, who are on the ballot this year. There is another state house candidate on the southwest side of Indianapolis, and I don't remember her name or her district, so I apologize. But there's also a county candidate up in Huntington County. So I appreciate the opportunity to see more folks getting in the fight for our representation. It's one thing that's important for us to recognize is that, while folks on the LGBTQ spectrum account for, depending upon which poll you look at, somewhere around 7% of the population falls somewhere in the rainbow. On the other hand, there are only about just over 1,000 elected officials in the United States who are LGBTQ, which means that we would have to just elect, I think, somewhere around another 32,000 of us to achieve proportional representation across the country. I was the 19th transgender elected official in the nation, at least according to Victory Institute's own map at out. Now I'm the website is.
I'll tell you what. I'll find
out for America. I think it is .com. But that Victory Institute maintains that map. And thankfully. Representation from folks who self-identify as trans or non-binary are about 3 times the numbers that existed when I was elected back in 2019.
Well, it's good to see the community getting more representation and to see society become more accepting, despite some very loud voices out there. And actually, I want to talk about them. So you ran for Greencastle City Council.
That's correct.
In 2019.
Yep.
Correct.
Yep.
Was there any nastiness around that?
My my election of 2019 was one for the storybooks, is what I like to say to folks. I had an interesting opponent who still to this day lives just a block and a half down the street from me. Greencastle is a city of 10,000, and
Yeah.
I was a ward counselor. And so, we have 4 wards in the city, and I was representing a quarter of that, 2,500. But we both lived on the same street. And so I was, as one does when one builds a campaign around what you're going to do for your community, one of the things that I wanted to uplift is what sorts of things distinguish who we are and how we might serve. And as I did what some folks might refer to as Oppo research, I took a few glances over at my rival's Facebook page, and his public postings there included items that were reposts, but they were still posts that said that all Muslim people should be deported from the United States and Islam should be banned. And so, among some other very divisive and phobic things, whether it's homophobic or transphobic, it was all over the spectrum. A lot of those kinds of memes that were being posted publicly without a filter on Facebook, and I very quietly, actually for several months, collected screenshots and links to all of those posts, documenting the material, and then built up a Wix-based website and registered my opponent's name as a .com, and had it and I let the public decide what those posts meant. And when that all hit the fan in late September, early October of 2019, it caused quite a stir in our community. It made the front page of our local paper, and those Facebook posts were there above the fold on the front page of our local paper, as they should be. It got picked up in Indianapolis by WIBC. Indeed, it made some national waves in that the Council for American Islamic Relations, CAIR, in Washington, D.C., put out a national press release from there, demanding that Governor Holcomb insist that my opponent retract his candidacy for our tiny little ward seat in Greencastle. Of course, Governor Holcomb did not make such a request, but at least CAIR made the effort to suggest or to put that call out, and I do appreciate that. So when I laid all of that out, that is when the dead naming and the and the transphobic direct attacks against me came, and I did my best to keep the high road through it all, and simply point out that I was running on a constitutional platform of religious liberty, insofar as everybody in our small community should be able to freely worship, no matter how or if they worship at all. Indeed, so we're a college town here in Greencastle, and the third ward includes parts of DePaul University, including the Center for Spiritual Life, where our Muslim neighbors and students go for Friday prayer. And so that is truly part of the community that I serve. And when this all got picked up in the papers, a good number, I might go so far as to say as a healthy majority of the faith leaders in our community got together amongst themselves, not at my suggestion, but they got together amongst themselves and put out a statement that was condemning the posts that my opponent made. So that gave our campaign quite a lot of traction, obviously going into November of 2019, and we won with 67% of the vote. We just slightly more than doubled my rival's vote total. That said, voter turnout in a municipal election in a rural Indiana community is not, even when your local newspaper is highlighting some of these things that are really important, that doesn't mean that folks are going to be turning out at a high rate. You still need to connect. I love our local journalists and the work that they do. And goodness knows that local journalism is under threat everywhere, just because of the business model of it all is so challenged these days by all the disinformation and all the free pathways to reposts and stuff like that. I would suggest that.
The truth is behind a paywall, but the misinformation is free.
Exactly, and in a chatter forum or in some strangely named private group on Facebook. But really, if you want to save democracy, one of the things that I strongly advocate for is to take that $10 that you might otherwise be spending on another streaming service and spend it on a monthly subscription to your county's paper of record. Indeed, in my district, in my Senate district, in all of Putnam County and Hendricks County, there are 2 newspapers of record. And so there's the Banner Graphic here in Greencastle and the Republican newspaper in Danville. And I'm thankful that they both exist and that they're doing the good work to ensure that the stories are told. But the fact of the matter is that it's challenging in just getting good government transparency out because our access to that public information is sometimes behind a paywall. So it's incumbent upon us who do serve in public office to find more pathways to making sure that the work that we do is more transparently shared through other channels that aren't necessarily behind paywalls.
So let's talk about the work that you do. Let's talk about some of your accomplishments on the city council there in Greencastle.
So, keep in mind that when we got sworn in on January 1st of 2020, we had no idea that we were staring a virus headlong in the eyes. And so 2020 was quite a year. And even moving forward and out of there, much of what we did as a community, as a city, was informed by the pandemic and responsive to that. We are a versatile and agile community, I'd like to say. We were doing the good work of making sure that our public safety officials were being more than adequately compensated and getting the extra pay that they needed for some of the extraordinary work that they were doing during the height of the pandemic, for sure. We have also been in stewardship of some COVID relief funds that we were doing our best to make sure that they were fairly being distributed across the community in ways that were impactful and helpful. But a couple of the things that I'm most proud of is just making sure that we're getting back on track with respect to infrastructure. When we looked at our budget for the 2022 going into 2023, we knew that our street repair budget was not up to snuff in terms of being able to get the work done that we needed to get done, especially in light of our asphalt supplies and labor costs increasing. So we actually wound up doubling our street repair budget in that last year. Another big thing that we did was pushing to ensure that we got a impartial salary study done so that all of our municipal workers, including our public safety officials, were paid on par with our peer communities across the state. We know that we're all competing for quality labor, right? And Greencastle's a great place to live, but if we're not paying our city employees well, it's not going to do us any good when we have to keep doing more searches. And when we're not paying our police officers well enough, we'll send them off to get trained, but then after they're trained, they might go off and work for another community after we've paid to train them. And so again, that comes back to bite us in the butt. During my last year in service, I was pushing hard and doing research that included some of the committees I serve on, and I still serve on Greencastle's Human Relations Commission. And with that commission, we were exploring the possibility of adopting a human rights ordinance like you folks have down in Bloomington and several other communities, including great communities like Carmel and Zionsville that at the time of the adoption of their ordinances, had Republican dominated councils and Republican mayors at the time. This is not a Democrat and Republican issue. This is a fairness issue, right? With respect to treating our neighbors right, both in employment and in housing and every other way that we can interact with our neighbors. And so there was a bit of a deluge of HROs that came out across the state after the after 2015 with the push for the Pence advocated
the
marriage,
RFRA,
RFRA thing. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. So it's the adoption of new ones has slowed down a bit, but we wanted to get on board. We did some consultation with friends over in Columbus. We never got it across the line. We're still facing some opposition within city government. So that's a fight that I'm going to have to leave for another day. But I'm still passionate that we need to have a human rights ordinance for our community, or better yet, let's pass an Equality Act for our own state at the state level.
Yes.
So.
Even better.
Yes, that's where I'm taking the fight now.
So before we get to your priorities, should you win in November, you serve on several boards, including Indiana Youth Group.
Yeah, so Indiana Youth Group is a 501c3 that serves LGBTQ youth across the state of Indiana. A lot of folks are familiar with the center in Indianapolis, but in fact, there are other satellite locations that have recently cropped up in other municipalities. Mm-hmm. There's one in Columbus now, and there's one in Crawfordsville. We just announced yesterday at our celebration event at the Indianapolis Zoo, we announced a partnership where we're opening an IYG Evansville. And so here's our goal as our vision for helping to serve a community that has been under assault by the Indiana legislature. Within 5 years, it is our goal as Indiana Youth Group to have affirming community within an hour's drive of anywhere in the state of Indiana. So we are looking all across the state. We think we can do this with 10 satellite facilities in addition to the downtown Indianapolis location, or the 38th and Meridian location, I should say. It all feels like downtown when I come to Indy from out here in Putnam County. So So I've served. This is my second year serving as treasurer for that organization. So I've had the opportunity to frequently see what our numbers are looking like. And when I say numbers, not just money, I know that in the last year we've seen demand for our services triple, and that's largely as a consequence to the hateful legislation coming out of the Indiana General Assembly. Young folks who are seeking affirming community, folks who are seeking mental health services. IYG now has 5 full-time mental health therapists and 2 social workers on staff. And we're hiring more because all of their caseloads are full. And there is still more and more demand. In fact, we are hiring right now for a mental health therapist who also has a background in substance use to help folks along who are suffering from substance use disorder, which is another passion of mine that brings me into the nonprofit space. I'm president of Putnam County Recovery Coalition here in my home county, and we are the only secular organization that serves folks who are facing addiction and connecting folks with peer counselors and recovery resources. So we work to distribute Narcan and save lives across Putnam County, not just here in Greencastle. We've launched a physical facility. We are hiring there too. So we are looking for more peer counselors, folks who are in recovery, who are interested in doing the good work of helping other people get through recovery as well. So those are 2 big things that I'm passionate about. I lost my oldest sister to overdose 7 years ago, and that has been instrumental to what motivates me to be involved in this space. And of course, my own experience through transition 20 years ago in the state of Indiana during the George W. Bush administration is part of why I am so passionate about helping to make a smoother road for some of our youth and young folks in the state of Indiana. I can affirm that when it was time for me to take my medical documentation to an Indiana BMV and get my driver's license updated with appropriate and matching gender markers, I actually had to go to 3 different branches before one would accept the legal documentation that I had to get all of that set up. These are not hurdles that Hoosiers should have to face at a tenuous time in our lives as we're trying to re-enter as our most authentic selves.
No, it really stinks that Republicans in the state legislature have decided their job is to take government and turn it against its own citizens, and it's frankly it's a liberty issue, right?
Absolutely,
the party of liberty, theoretically, is stepping on people's freedom to be themselves,
right? And so when we talk about the whole bodily autonomy issue, I'm a walking, talking example of a need for more liberties related to bodily autonomy, and I am passionately in that fight for our healthcare freedoms, whether it's our reproductive freedoms or our access to transition-related care. All of those things are part of the bodily autonomy conversation. And it's so important that our state, that is run by folks who say they're all about liberty and freedom and small government, keeps the hell out of our doctors' offices and stays out of important science-based conversations that patients have with their doctors or parents have with pediatricians along with their kids who have needs too. And so, when we talk about the unfortunate Senate Enrolled Act 480 from last year, I testified against that bill, and my own senator at the time, John Crane, whose seat I am seeking to take, was there across the room from me in the health committee chamber as I was testifying about my own experience transitioning and about this being a liberty issue. When I and some of the words I shared had to do with the fact that, as an elected official, I put my hand on my heart and I talk about liberty and justice for all. And when we have a state legislature that decides liberty and justice is not for all, it's only for some of us, but for the rest of you, we're going to put some restrictions on being yourself, or getting the health care that you need, or being able to navigate through the world without having to go to 3 different BMVs. This is not liberty.
Yeah, and so you jumped into where I wanted to go next, and we're talking about your top issues of your campaign, and the number one issue on your campaign website is healthcare freedom and bodily autonomy.
Absolutely, and that is absolutely top priority. From the way I would prefer to approach it is through a ballot referendum and open ballot. Leave it to the voice of the people. We know this is a 60-40 issue in the state of Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
Ball State's own Hoosier survey from last year affirmed that this was a 60-40 issue. Technically a 41-59 issue, I guess, but it's close enough. I will call that a rounding error. It's definitely an issue that the majority of Hoosiers are on board with. It is a liberty issue, right? And same, I like to often speak of the reproductive freedom issue in the same breath as marijuana legalization, because that's an 80-20 issue in this state. And I really feel firmly that the open referendum, there needs to be a mechanism. And I do realize that's going to take a constitutional amendment. And I am ready to work toward that. So it may take us that far. It may take us that long to get there, but it's time that we as Hoosiers stood up for our liberties, all of us, and not just, and not just for our right to keep and bear arms, but also our right to have the health care that we need.
Yeah, and from a pure cynical strategy standpoint, the fact that it's going to require a constitutional amendment, I think in a way helps us, because, and we have to say, this is the challenge.
Yep.
If we're going to amend the Constitution to give the people of this state the autonomy over their own bodies, then we can go to Hoosiers and say, we need to elect Democrats in every position, all the way up and down the ballot. 92
counties, and it's going to take multiple electoral cycles to be able to manifest that constitutional amendment. But that I think is the most viable pathway that I can see, given the state of the current political landscape in the state house at this time.
Yes, indeed.
As we think about some of the other things that I'm largely focused on, important issues, I mentioned that adequately approaching substance use disorder in our state. That's another big topic that I'm keen on focusing on as a top priority. We need to adopt a legislative approach to substance use disorder that treats addiction as a public health issue rather than a crime.
Yep.
Or
a moral failing.
Right, yeah. Right. And when we talk in the recovery community about stopping the stigma around addiction, that's part of dispelling that notion of moral failings around substance use. And in my interactions with our local county-wide here in Putnam County, our public first responders, the sheriffs and the 911 folks and the EMTs who serve our community go out and respond to mental health crisis calls. We've had a strong affirmation that the correlation between mental health crises in our community and substance use disorder is an extraordinarily high one. We're talking 80-90%. When somebody calls with suicidality call to 911 in our community, there's often a substance use component somewhere along the way as well. So when we talk about adequately addressing the mental health crisis in our community, I think these two things are often intersectional, and we can't completely talk about one without talking about the other. And so I'm going to pivot a little bit and say a little bit more about the way that we respond to mental health crisis calls. This is something that our Human Relations Commission here in Greencastle has taken on as a county-wide issue. We've been spearheading a series of conversations that have brought in our sheriff's department, our public police departments, our 911 services, and also folks who work in the emergency room and in mental health care. How are we able to better improve outcomes for these folks who need just-in-time mental health services? And it's not, there's not a single answer to what's needed. We know that we can look at other communities like in Crawfordsville and Terre Haute, who are adopting mobile response teams that send non-armed individuals who can provide care at a time that in the moment care at a time when it's super important, which, quite frankly, also takes a big load off of our police departments and our sheriff's deputies who otherwise could be serving the community in other important ways than needing to take on these mental health crises. So we're all in this together. We know that we need not only those mobile response teams, but we also need to do better in terms of increasing the workforce pipeline for mental health workers. We need literally to train and hire more therapists across the state. We need to recognize that this is a labor crisis on that side of things too, and have more folks available, because there just aren't enough folks who are trained in the mental health treatment field who can respond in time and keep up with the demand.
It's like our state legislature keeps chasing clinically trained and well-educated people out of the state with their draconian laws.
Indeed. Well, that seems to be a theme of the Indiana General Assembly chasing good qualified folks out of a variety of professions, which, we can talk about what they've done for the teaching profession over the last 20 years since Mitch Daniels began his crusade of privatizing the public education sector here in our great state. And that's a wonderful segue into what is another one of my top priorities, and that is keeping our public education truly public. As I mentioned,
yes,
my mom was a public middle school teacher. She was a math teacher in the state of Illinois, and she had this thing that apparently seems like a dirty word these days. She had a pension that was very beneficial to her in her retirement, and
I'm gonna have to explain what a pension is for the kids in the audience.
Because it's really not really so much a part of the lexicon anymore, right? Interestingly enough, as I mentioned, my dad was a municipal water engineer, and my mom was a public school math teacher, and I'm like the fourth generation of educators in my family. I have twins. And they both graduated from Purdue on the same day in different ceremonies because they went through different degree programs. Frank studied math education, and so he was seeing, he knew that there was a crisis and a shortage of math teachers in the state of Indiana, and he wanted to enter the profession. After graduating, he spent his first 2 years in the workforce, teaching in a public high school, teaching math. And, the profession is not what it was when my mom was teaching in the 1980s. And quite honestly, the draconian requirements, the paperwork, the red tape that we all hear about so much, that is forcing a crisis of, forcing teachers out of the workforce. I'm thankful, honestly, that my son Frank decided to move on out of that career and into something that he felt was more rewarding when he was early in his career. I see too many, sort of mid-career and late career public school teachers in my community here in Greencastle who wish they had changed careers a little bit earlier in their lives. And it's just unfortunate that our politicians in the State House are doing no good by our public school teachers. And of course, the least of all of that is the fact that we are, through the nation's largest voucher program, finding the newest and most creative ways to siphon money away from the only schools that would accept special needs students, or the only school in your community that might accept an LGBTQ student in your neighborhood. So when we say, well, this money is going to be transportable with the student, and it's the parent's choice to take that money where it can go, that's not doing any good for your neighbor's kid who has a special needs student that quite frankly is more of a drain on the system for what it's worth. We're pulling great students out of good systems and harming the public system as a consequence.
Yeah, well, and that's the goal, right? I mean, Republicans want public schools to fail, and I know it sounds like, mustache twirling evil, but there are two reasons, and one is privatization. Private school, for-profit charters want their, they got their hands in the pot, and then the other one is your religious schools, and they want public money, and I mean, frankly, I think that runs afoul of the First Amendment, but I'm no constitutional lawyer.
I would agree with you, Scott. I'm also not a constitutional lawyer, but I am just a small just an old country college professor with a side hustle, also as an instructional technologist on my campus because my professoring is part time. I head up the instructional technology space here at DePauw. We have a team of 3, so you can imagine when we needed to pivot and go to virtual back in 2020. We were the tip of the spear for those 200 faculty members, making sure that they those folks who were so accustomed to chalkboard suddenly needed to use Zoom. So we were very thankful coming out of that. But what I wanted to say about the the public school privatization issue is when we talk about the Indiana General Assembly being so knee-jerk, reactionary to stuff. Last year they said, okay, we have a crisis with 3rd grade reading levels. We're going to adopt a new reading program and see how it goes. And then the next year, they didn't even give it a year to see how it did. They're coming back and saying, oh, 3rd grade reading levels are down. We're going to have to try something else. And they're just layering on more layers of challenges for the folks who work or the great folks who work in our public schools, by adding this whole other social component of holding students back in 3rd grade who are falling behind. We have to ask ourselves, 12 years ago, the 3rd grade illiteracy rate, or the fail rate on that reading test, was less than half of what it was now. And in Indiana government, there was a Republican trifecta for that entire 12 years. Can somebody tell me who else to blame for this decline in our reading scores? That decline, it's more than doubled over the last 12 years. The fail rate on that 3rd grade reading test. It falls squarely.
Well, I'm sure the GOP would love for the teachers to be blamed.
Of
right?
course,
that's their big boogeyman. But they've been here the whole time.
That's right.
The Republican trifecta in the State House has only been here for those 12 years. And education makes up more than half of the state budget, and they are meddlesome. And how many of these people are professional educators? There is a science to teaching.
There is.
And these guys, I'd like to think that, they have their own ideas for how things should be done, but it's not even their own ideas. I mean, this stuff is getting written up by ALEC, and they're, the Koch brothers are writing up laws in Wichita somewhere and sending them over here. And then these guys are just rubber stamps.
Half of these bills are, as you mentioned, are coming from other places. And indeed, half of these bills had already been passed with largely no further amendment in other states, right? When we look at some of the crazy anti-LGBTQ laws, one only needs to look to Florida to see what's going to happen next year in Indiana. There seems to be an echo in the Indiana General Assembly of who can be first to harm our queer youth in our education system, between Florida and Florida 2.0.
You ever at the Children's Museum in Indianapolis, you go and you holler into the horn at the one end, right? And your friends on the other end, you can hear what they're saying on the horn. Yeah, it's like a fascist hollers into one end of a horn in Florida, and Todd Houston's on the other end.
And it's just an echo of another bill, right? And they say, oh, we're not going to go further and this year, and then they do. The government, or the governor this year, said to all the General Assembly is like, stay away from those hot button social issues. We're just getting business done this year. And then they come out with a bill in the House that says that folks like me won't exist anymore in Indiana code because we'll be defined by the sex at our birth in all matters, in all legal matters in the state of Indiana. Which I'm not sure how they're going to proceed to karyotype me because all of my documentation is affirming. I don't think that they've necessarily thought this whole thing through.
They never do. No, it's all vibes with these guys,
It is about the feels.
Bad vibes.
Yeah, it's about the feels, but that's how they'll score their points.
So, if our listeners would like to help put you in the Senate to stand up to those guys, where can they go? What can they do? How can they help your campaign?
They can go to veronicaforindiana.com. That's FOR spelled out. I try to make that distinction. So veronicaforindiana.com takes you to the website where there are links to either volunteer for the campaign, to donate to the campaign, of course, because it's going to take a fair amount of resources for us to get our positive message for transforming our state into a more just and more free place for us all to live. So we certainly appreciate all of those resources. We're actually having a campaign event here in Greencastle in just 1 week from today, from the recording of this podcast episode. But we're going to be having more events across the district, including in our more densely populated areas of Hendricks County later on in the season. We're thinking up some pretty big stuff, so stay tuned on that. So if you want to be part of making phone calls, whether you want to be part of being part of a text banking effort, or whether you just want a yard sign, there are places on the website there to sign up for all of that. And of course, there's opportunity to donate your resources as well. We welcome your time, your talent, and your treasure.
Very good. Veronica Pedro, thank you so much for joining the Who's Left podcast.
Thank you so much, Scott. It's been a pleasure talking to you today.
Once again, that was the Greencastle City Councilwoman and State Senate District 24 candidate Veronica Pedro. Just, what a remarkable individual. Raised by public servants, becomes a public servant herself. Someone who brings the joy of music to her community and has taught children how to express themselves musically as well. Veronica is one of those helpers Fred Rogers talked about. An ally to police, fire, and first responders, an advocate for vulnerable youth, a champion for those struggling with addiction. A Hoosier by choice who works every day to improve her city, county, and state. And Indiana Republicans would rather she didn't exist. We've already discussed last year's terrible Senate Bill 480, that law, which was signed by Governor Holcomb last April, the literal day after he called it, quote, clear as mud, just went into effect after an injunction was lifted by the U.S. 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. It bans gender-affirming care for minors under the age of 18. Now think of this. And all of the other vitriol directed at the queer youth of this state, their families and allies. And imagine all of the potential Veronicas we're pushing away. Teachers, musicians, police, firefighters, EMTs, people that strengthen the fabric of our communities, driven out of the state in fear for their health, their safety, their very lives. And the GOP won't stop with the kids. Just this January, Representative Chris Judy, douchebag from District 83, and 3 other religious extremist goons introduced House Bill 1291, which would have ended all legal recognition of transgender people in the state. Now, some states like Florida, Missouri, and Ohio have already, according to Axios, quote, broadly limited or sought to broadly limit transition care for adults, end quote. Now, Thankfully, HB 1291 didn't make it out of committee, but don't think it won't pop up again next year or that Indiana Republicans won't go all in on hate like their counterparts in other jurisdictions. You know, when I started the Who's Left Project, I had the name before anything else. Obviously, it's a portmanteau for Hoosier Left, but the underlying play on words is a distinct reference to the brain drain Indiana faces as our best and brightest leave the state. The hell with what people call themselves, what pronouns they choose, what they wear, who they date. Every state, every community needs people like Veronica Pedrell. Teachers, helpers, allies, public servants. If our state stays the course with MAGA Christian nationalism extremism, all of our best people, who have the means to do so, will leave. And then who's left? Just racists, bigots, and small-minded idiots like Donald Trump, Mike Braun, and Chris Judy. That's it for me this time. Again, subscribe at scottaaronrogers.substack.com. Follow me on Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok at Who's Left, and on most other social media sites at ScottRog78. If you want to reach me, send me a DM on the socials or email me at scottrog78@gmail.com. Until next time, this has been the Who's Left Podcast. I'm Scott Aaron Rogers. Love each other.